The scandal broke like a sudden crack in a cathedral silence, swift and merciless, ending Eleanor Harwood's modest life with the force of a blow no one could see. One moment she stood in the drawing room of the Ashcombe residence, reciting French verbs to two inattentive daughters. The next, accusations, baseless, whispered, sharpened by jealousy, descended upon her like a storm designed to wash her from respectable existence. She had been seen, they claimed, standing too near the Ashcombe heir in the conservatory, though she had been there only to retrieve a book left behind by the children. But rumor seldom bowed to truth. Eleanor's dismissal was arranged within hours, swift enough to ensure she had neither voice nor defense. She left with her single trunk, escorted not by kindness but by the butler's rigid shadow, and as the carriage door shut behind her, she felt the sting of a life reduced to suspicion. London greeted her not as sanctuary but as judge. Its rain-slicked cobblestones glistened beneath gas lamps that blurred into hazy halos, and every passerby seemed to turn just enough to confirm the rumor already coursing through servants' corridors and market stalls: the governess had been caught in impropriety. She walked with her chin lifted, but her heart tightened with each murmur that drifted toward her from the fog. Still, Eleanor refused surrender. She wrote letters by candlelight, sending them to every family she had once served, praying for someone to speak truth in her defense. The replies came slowly, each more sympathetic than helpful, until one final envelope arrived, thick paper, impeccable script, sealed with the crest of an eagle in flight. The sender, Mr. Percival Alden, solicitor to the Duke of Harrowden. The letter was brief, austere, requesting a discreet meeting regarding a matter of employment. When she arrived at the solicitor's office the next afternoon, she expected another disappointment. Instead, she found a man studying her with calm precision, weighing integrity rather than rumor. Mr. Alden explained that his employer required a woman of education, restraint, and impeccable comportment, qualities Eleanor possessed even in her shaken state. But as he described the position, her breath faltered. The role was not that of a governess. It was not that of a companion. It was, impossibly, that of a duchess. Her confusion must have shown, for Mr. Alden folded his hands and said, with careful clarity, that the Duke sought a wife in name only, a union meant to appease political pressures threatening his ancestral estate. Eleanor listened, feeling each word settle like snow, soft, unreal, yet coldly decisive. A stranger wished to marry her, not out of affection but necessity. It sounded like insult layered upon injury, until Mr. Alden added that the Duke insisted upon mutual respect and absolute freedom within the arrangement, requiring no intimacy, no pretense of affection, only the dignity of her presence. She asked why she, of all England's women, had been selected. Mr. Alden replied that the Duke required a bride unencumbered by social ambition, someone who would not seek emotional claims he could not return. Her recent misfortune, he admitted with gentle tact, made her uniquely positioned to consider such an unconventional proposal. And though the words pricked her pride, Eleanor found no cruelty in his tone, only recognition of a truth she had been forced to swallow. Her prospects were scarce, her survival uncertain. That night, she wrestled with the proposition as wind rattled her window. Marrying a duke, even in pretense, would restore her respectability. It would give her roof, stability, protection from the whispers that had destroyed her. But to bind her life to a stranger's, even honorably, felt perilous. She imagined this Duke Adrian Whitmore, aloof, driven, burdened by lineage and duty. What sort of man offers marriage without affection? What sorrows had carved him into someone who believed companionship a liability? Yet another question rose quietly within her: what future awaited her if she refused? By dawn, exhaustion had not yielded clarity, yet a resolve settled over her. If life had already stripped her of place and reputation, she would not permit it to strip her of agency. She would choose her path, even if it led into shadow. She sent Mr. Alden her acceptance with a steady hand and a prayer for courage. 2 days later, a carriage bearing the Whitmore crest arrived to escort her to Harrowden Hall. The journey unfolded in contemplative silence, the countryside stretched in muted winter hues beyond the window. Eleanor felt neither triumph nor fear, simply the weight of stepping into a story she had never imagined for herself. At the crest of a hill, the estate emerged in the distance, vast and solemn, a testament to centuries of lineage and the burdens that accompanied it. As the carriage slowed before its iron gates, she sensed the air shift, as though the world itself paused to consider her next breath. Somewhere within those stone walls waited the man whose life she was about to tether to her own. She wondered whether he would be cruel, indifferent, or unexpectedly kind. But as she stepped down from the carriage, one truth struck her with quiet force: whatever lay ahead, her ruined past no longer defined her future. Yet the moment she crossed the threshold, a figure emerged from the shadows of the grand foyer, a tall, austere man with eyes that seemed to hold both frost and fire. And with one measured glance, the Duke of Harrowden made it unmistakably clear, whatever Eleanor believed she had agreed to, the reality of their union would test them both in ways neither had foreseen. The first shock of her new life struck before Eleanor had even taken her second breath inside Harrowden Hall. A sharp crack echoed from somewhere deep within the manor, the unmistakable sound of a door slammed with force restrained only by upbringing. It was not rage, she realized, but something fiercer and more complicated, frustration honed into silence. The Duke himself stepped forward from the shadows, tall and impeccably composed, yet edged with the tension of a man who had not slept without worry in years. His gaze swept over her not with cruelty but with calculation, as though he were bracing himself against whatever answer her presence might require. Eleanor lowered her eyes, not from fear, but from the awareness that she had just walked into a life shaped by pressures far greater than her own. He greeted her with a single bow of his head, a gesture precise and almost brittle. His voice, low and controlled, filled the air between them. He thanked her for accepting the arrangement, noting that the circumstances were unusual, but necessity seldom bowed to comfort. Eleanor replied with equal composure, though her heart stuttered beneath her bodice. She felt as though she stood on a threshold not only of a new home but of an unspoken test. His eyes softened for a fleeting instant, revealing weariness more than suspicion, yet the moment vanished as quickly as a breath swallowed by cold air. A maid led her through unfamiliar corridors, each lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to debate her worthiness. The manor held grandeur, yes, but also a quiet austerity, the kind found in houses where affection had once lived and then slowly fled. Eleanor sensed immediately that Harrowden Hall was not merely crumbling in stone, it was crumbling in spirit. Something, or perhaps many things, had hollowed it long before she arrived. Yet she also felt, unexpectedly, that the house was studying her, deciding whether she would add to its fractures or help mend them. Her assigned chambers overlooked the east gardens, though winter had stripped them of color. She breathed the air cautiously, half expecting her scandal to trail behind her like smoke. Instead, she found only stillness, as though the world beyond the manor had vanished. Moments later, a quiet knock signaled the Duke's secretary, Mr. Alden, who came to review the expectations of the arrangement. His tone remained kind yet formal, emphasizing the duties required of a duchess in name, if not in intimacy. She must appear poised, reliable, and capable of supporting the Duke's public image, though she would never be forced into companionship that felt unnatural. Eleanor nodded, though each expectation settled like a small stone into the river of her uncertainty. After the meeting, she ventured through the hall to acquaint herself with the spaces she might inhabit. She paused upon reaching the library, drawn by the faint scent of aging parchment and distant firelight. When she entered, she startled to find the Duke seated alone, a document clenched in his hand. His expression held the shadowed tension of a man reading news he did not trust. He rose when he noticed her, offering a greeting gentler than their first exchange. Though he said little, she sensed something shifting, perhaps his acknowledgement that she was now part of his world. He asked whether she found the accommodation suitable. Eleanor answered truthfully, adding that she wished only to be of use. Something in her tone seemed to catch him off guard, for his gaze flickered with faint surprise. He apologized for the earlier abruptness, explaining that urgent matters had reached him from London. She asked no questions, though curiosity coiled inside her. His burdens were not hers to claim, yet she felt the stirrings of empathy, subtle as threads of light through heavy drapes. Their conversation ended when a footman approached the Duke with another sealed message. The Duke's jaw tightened, and he excused himself swiftly. Eleanor watched him go, sensing the tremor of conflict beneath his restraint. She wondered whether she was meant merely to serve his political convenience or whether their fates would entangle far more deeply than either expected. Later, at dinner, she found the grand hall nearly deserted. Only the Duke dined with her, though several courses suggested the ghosts of tradition lingered. Conversation began tentatively, shaped by politeness and the boundaries of their arrangement. Yet as moments passed, the silence between them softened, no longer brittle but contemplative. Eleanor learned that the Duke disliked idle chatter but valued sincerity. He learned that she had taught herself Greek during a particularly lonely season of her employment. That admission earned a quiet spark of admiration in his expression, one he tried, and failed, to hide. Their meal ended with a subtle shift neither could name. When he rose, he thanked her for her company with a tone that carried more warmth than formality allowed. As she stood to leave, he asked whether she felt overwhelmed. She admitted that any new life felt unsteady at first. His response surprised her, gentle enough to pierce her reserve. He assured her she was not alone in her uncertainty. Then, with a brief nod, he dismissed himself, leaving her with a strange fluttering sensation she had not invited yet could not quiet. That night, she returned to her chambers unsettled by the day's contradictions. The Duke had been distant, yet perceptive, severe, yet unexpectedly considerate. Her role in his life remained ambiguous, suspended between necessity and possibility. As she prepared for rest, she could not shake the impression that she had stepped into a house shaped by secrets, each waiting to reveal itself one by one. Just as she extinguished the last candle, a soft rustle slid beneath her door. A folded note. No seal. No signature. Only one line written in a hand she recognized. And the words, though few, carried the weight of a looming truth: "There are matters you must know before our arrangement becomes impossible to uphold." The storm broke without warning, as if the sky itself had decided to mirror the turmoil in Eleanor's heart. Rain pelted the windows of Harrowden Hall, the wind groaning through the eaves as though lamenting some long-forgotten grief. She stood in the library, her hands resting upon the carved oak desk, gripping the edges as if the solidity of the wood could anchor her. The note from the previous evening lay unopened beside her, yet its words haunted her thoughts with relentless insistence. "There are matters you must know before our arrangement becomes impossible to uphold." How could one line carry such weight, and why had it chosen her? She felt the first tremors of unease ripple through the carefully constructed calm she had maintained since her arrival. The Duke entered without knocking, his silhouette dark against the stormlight that slanted across the shelves. His expression was unreadable, a mask forged from years of restraint, yet his eyes betrayed a shadow of vulnerability. Eleanor looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time since their union began, she felt the distance between them compress. The words she had held close, the questions, the fears, pressed against her chest. She dared not speak, yet her silence seemed to demand explanation. He approached slowly, setting a small stack of letters upon the desk. His hands lingered near hers as he arranged them with meticulous care, a gesture so intimate in its precision that Eleanor felt an almost imperceptible shiver. "You requested clarity," he said, his voice low, carefully measured, yet carrying an undercurrent of something she could not name. "There are truths here, and I shall offer them without embellishment. But know this, once spoken, they cannot be unspoken." She nodded, swallowing the quick rise of fear, and braced herself for the revelation that would alter the course of their tenuous alliance. He began with the estate. Harrowden Hall, grand and formidable, bore the weight of debts accumulated over generations. Each ledger, each line of account, revealed a history of mismanagement, familial expectation, and political pressure. Eleanor listened, absorbing the severity of the Duke's burden, the responsibility that shaped every measured word, every stoic gesture. Yet she also sensed something deeper, loneliness carved into the marrow of the man before her, a solitude no fortune or title could alleviate. He spoke not for pity but for truth, and in doing so, he invited her into the inner sanctum of his life with a frankness she had never encountered. Then, hesitating only a moment, he shared the more personal history that had forged his guarded nature. A childhood of rigid expectation, of parental distance, of friendships curtailed by social standing. A love lost in youth, extinguished by circumstance and propriety, whose memory lingered like a faint scent of smoke in the hallways of his mind. Eleanor listened, each word a delicate brushstroke revealing the man beneath the Duke's imposing exterior. She felt a pang of empathy so sharp it startled her. This was a man shaped by loneliness, yet unyielding in his attempt to contain it. When he finished, silence filled the room like an unspoken question. Eleanor dared not breathe too loudly, fearing she might shatter the fragile bridge forming between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but deliberate. She shared the truth of her own fall, how the false accusations had stripped her of employment, dignity, and a sense of belonging. As she spoke, she watched the Duke's face, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw, the faint narrowing of his eyes, the unguarded flicker of anger directed not at her, but at the injustice of the world. In that moment, she realized their shared vulnerability was not a weakness, but the first step toward an unexpected alliance. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows in furious percussion, and Eleanor felt the walls of propriety and distance begin to erode. Words, carefully chosen and measured for survival, gave way to shared understanding. She admitted her fears about the arrangement, about serving merely as a symbol of convenience, a placeholder in a life orchestrated by duty rather than affection. The Duke, in turn, acknowledged the truth of her anxiety, his voice quiet but resolute. The arrangement had been necessary, yes, but her presence had become more than practicality, more than a formality. He did not confess love, yet, but he admitted that her insight, her temperance, and her courage had touched him in ways he could not anticipate. Eleanor felt a tremor of something new, something fragile and unbidden, take root within her chest. For the first time, she understood that this was not merely a union of convenience, but a tentative meeting of spirits, each testing the waters of connection while still constrained by the weight of society's expectations. The intimacy of confession, the revelation of private sorrows, created a current between them, subtle yet undeniable, a thread stretching taut with potential. Minutes, or was it hours, passed in reflective quiet, broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the soft ticking of the clock. Eleanor's mind turned over the implications of their revelations. The Duke, so composed and restrained, had allowed himself vulnerability, however brief. Could such openness be trusted? And if it could, what did it mean for the precarious balance they had so carefully maintained? She felt herself teetering between caution and curiosity, her heart attuned to every subtle shift in his posture, every inflection in his voice. Finally, the Duke broke the silence. He rose from the desk and moved to the window, gazing outward at the rain-slicked gardens. "There are decisions to be made," he said, not turning to face her. "And yet, some choices cannot be dictated by necessity alone." Eleanor understood immediately that he referred not merely to the estate, or even the arrangement itself, but to the fragile possibilities of the bond forming between them. His words were measured, yet laced with an undercurrent of desire restrained by propriety and fear. She dared not hope, yet the notion hovered in the air like mist over the winter grounds. She approached him cautiously, drawn not by obligation but by empathy, by the recognition that this man, so formidable in public and so burdened by duty, was capable of depth and tenderness. Her hand hovered briefly at her side, unsure whether to extend a gesture, and the Duke glanced at her then, his eyes betraying a flicker of something, acknowledgment, perhaps, or an invitation unspoken. The room seemed to hold its breath, the storm outside a distant echo to the quiet tension within. For the first time, Eleanor felt that the arrangement was not merely a shield against social scrutiny or a solution to fiscal pressure. It was, instead, a fragile experiment in trust, a delicate negotiation between two wounded hearts. She realized that to navigate this precarious path, she would need both courage and patience, a willingness to engage with the Duke not only as a figure of authority but as a man capable of affection and sorrow. And in the same moment, she recognized that he, too, had begun to see her as more than a convenient emblem of propriety. He had begun to see her as a presence, subtle yet insistent, capable of softening even the most rigid edges of his solitude. The Duke finally turned to face her, his expression inscrutable, yet there was a softness there she had not noticed before. He gestured toward the desk. "There is more to share," he said quietly. "And yet, for now, let us consider the truths we have spoken sufficient. They are not complete, but they are necessary. You have given me confidence in your discretion, Eleanor. I am grateful for that." She inclined her head, understanding the weight of his words. Gratitude mingled with anticipation, and a sense of shared complicity formed, delicate as frost upon the windowpane. She knew the path ahead would not be simple. There were still obligations, rumors, and societal expectations to navigate. Yet the admission of vulnerability had altered the equilibrium between them. For the first time, Eleanor sensed that the distance imposed by title and circumstance might be bridged, not by declarations of passion, but by acknowledgement of shared experience and mutual respect. As the storm outside began to wane, the room seemed to hold a new kind of quiet, a pause, pregnant with possibility. Eleanor felt the faintest warmth in her chest, a reminder that human connection could exist even in the midst of obligation and duty. The Duke, standing near the window, appeared equally contemplative, his rigid posture softened by the subtle acknowledgement that their arrangement had evolved into something far more complex than either had anticipated. And then, as she prepared to take her leave for the evening, a sudden knock at the library door startled them both. A footman entered, carrying a sealed envelope bearing the unmistakable mark of the crown. The Duke's expression darkened, and Eleanor felt the familiar pulse of uncertainty return. Whatever revelations had begun to weave between them, it seemed the world beyond Harrowden Hall would not allow them even a moment of reprieve. The envelope's presence suggested urgency, perhaps even threat, and she sensed instinctively that their fragile trust would soon be tested in ways neither could yet foresee. She met the Duke's gaze, and in that shared look lay a mutual understanding. The revelations of the evening were only the beginning. Outside, the rain had ceased, but within the hall, a storm of expectation and duty was gathering strength once more, promising that the truth spoken tonight would demand consequences in the days to come. The moment shattered like glass beneath the weight of inevitability. A letter, delivered in haste by a trembling footman, landed upon the library desk with a thud that echoed through the hall like a verdict. Eleanor's hands trembled as she lifted it, the seal of the crown heavy with authority and consequence. She felt the air tighten around her, the temperature of the room dipping as if the walls themselves recognized the significance of the missive. The Duke, standing rigid near the hearth, reached for it with deliberate care, his dark eyes scanning the words before the first syllable had crossed her mind. Eleanor watched in silence, sensing that whatever lay within those lines would reshape the fragile equilibrium of their lives. The message was clear, insistent. The Crown demanded proof that the union between Duke Adrian Whitmore and Eleanor Harwood was genuine, not merely symbolic. Every arrangement, every quiet understanding, every unspoken moment of connection would be scrutinized. The Duke's jaw tightened, and for a brief instant, the mask of his composed authority faltered, revealing a flicker of vulnerability Eleanor had never before witnessed. She felt an unexpected surge of empathy, her chest constricting as she realized the enormity of the challenge he now faced. Yet beneath the weight of duty and obligation, she detected the first hints of resolve, tempered by pride and a deep, simmering care for her own presence in his life. "I suppose," he said finally, voice low and measured, "that we must demonstrate to the world what has already taken root in truth." His words were carefully chosen, yet they carried a resonance beyond propriety, suggesting an acknowledgement of the bond forming between them, however nascent and fragile. Eleanor's heart quickened, a quiet warmth spreading through her chest as she realized that the Duke's recognition of her importance was no longer confined to the privacy of their shared confidences. This was an acknowledgement that demanded action, courage, and a willingness to claim something far more substantial than appearances allowed. The following days unfolded with meticulous precision. Together, they attended the manor's affairs, from meetings with tenants to the careful oversight of estate accounts, always maintaining the delicate balance between public duty and private truth. Eleanor noticed the subtle shifts in Adrian's demeanor, how his eyes lingered a fraction longer upon her, how his gestures, once restrained, softened in her presence. The gift of his attention, though modest, carried an intimacy that she could not ignore. She found herself observing him in turn, attuned to the smallest inflections of his voice, the quiet tension in his shoulders, the rare, fleeting smile that surfaced when he believed no one noticed. A thread of connection wove between them, delicate yet undeniable, a fragile line of trust and burgeoning affection. One afternoon, as the winter sun slanted low across the stone floors, Adrian invited her to the garden. Snow had melted to reveal the first hints of green, though the air remained crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint fragrance of winter blooms. He walked beside her with measured steps, hands clasped behind his back, and for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to regard him without the restraint demanded by propriety. She noticed the sharp planes of his face softened by thought, the rare tension of his brow eased by the presence of another who understood without questioning. And in that quiet communion, she felt the subtle pull of desire mingled with respect, a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying. It was in the library that evening, as firelight flickered across their faces, that the true nature of their bond began to crystallize. Adrian's expression was unreadable, yet his eyes betrayed the careful contemplation of a man who weighed not only duty but something far more personal. He spoke of obligations, of the scrutiny that awaited them, of the necessity of outward appearances. Yet each word carried a double edge, revealing his own investment in the success of their union. Eleanor listened, feeling the gravity of their shared responsibility, yet sensing that beneath the formalities lay a growing recognition of the heart's insistence, a quiet, persistent force neither had dared fully acknowledge. When their conversation concluded, he remained standing, a subtle tension in his posture that Eleanor could not ignore. "Eleanor," he said softly, voice low enough that only she could hear, "the world will demand proof of our union, yet it is proof of something far deeper I seek, proof that I can trust my own judgment in matters of the heart." His words, measured and deliberate, carried the weight of confession without the audacity of declaration. Eleanor felt a tremor of understanding, realizing that their arrangement, though born of necessity, had begun to evolve into something far more intimate, far more profound than either had anticipated. The following evening, a minor scandal erupted within the county. A careless servant, gossiping without discretion, allowed hints of the Duke's attentiveness toward his Duchess to reach the ears of local nobility. Whispers circulated of a woman who, though newly married, commanded attention not merely by title but by subtle influence and presence. The Duke, ever composed, met the rumors with a calm that belied his concern, yet Eleanor noted the slight narrowing of his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. She understood that he guarded not only his estate and reputation but the fragile trust developing between them. And she felt, for the first time, the full weight of her own role, not merely as participant in a contract, but as a custodian of the connection that had quietly grown into significance. Days later, an evening of quiet study in the library revealed the Duke's unexpected generosity. He left upon her desk a single, small gift, a delicate silver bookmark, engraved with a motif of intertwining vines. No words accompanied it, yet the gesture spoke volumes. Eleanor felt the warmth of recognition, the acknowledgement of her presence and worth, a validation far more intimate than any declaration could convey. She understood then that the Duke's attention, restrained yet deliberate, was no longer merely procedural. It carried the subtle weight of care, the unspoken promise of consideration and awareness that transcended obligation. As the winter weeks waned, Eleanor observed a subtle but unmistakable shift in the rhythms of their shared existence. The Duke allowed her insight in matters of estate and correspondence, valued her judgment, and, on rare occasions, permitted a moment of quiet camaraderie. In return, she discovered the depth of his commitment to duty, the precision with which he measured every decision, and the occasional tenderness that revealed itself only in private. Each interaction, however restrained, carried a resonance that neither dared name aloud but both understood in the silent language of shared experience. One evening, a moonlit corridor witnessed a moment that neither would forget. Walking side by side, reviewing letters by the candlelit sconces, their hands brushed briefly, a fleeting touch, yet enough to ignite awareness of proximity and unspoken connection. Neither spoke, yet the silence spoke volumes. Eleanor felt the heat of the gesture linger, a delicate acknowledgement of closeness without violating decorum. She dared not hope, yet the heart responded in ways reason could not contain. The culmination of these days arrived with an intimate conversation beside the hearth, the firelight painting their faces with shadows and warmth. Adrian spoke not of estate or obligation, but of trust, of reliance, and of the subtle assurance that one's presence could shape another's life in profound and unforeseen ways. Eleanor, listening, realized that their bond had evolved into something far more nuanced than contract or convenience. It was a delicate equilibrium of shared vulnerabilities, mutual respect, and the quiet acknowledgement that the heart, even when constrained by duty, could insist upon recognition. And yet, just as the room seemed to settle into this fragile harmony, another letter arrived, delivered silently by the housekeeper. Its contents remained unread, a sealed mystery that carried with it the weight of royal expectation and looming judgment. The Duke's expression darkened as he set it aside, his lips pressing into a thin line. Eleanor sensed immediately that the fragile trust and subtle intimacy they had cultivated would soon be tested in ways neither could yet foresee. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, a prelude to the storm gathering not only in the hall but in the days to come. The day arrived with sudden, unforgiving clarity, as though the very air of Harrowden Hall had been charged with expectation. A carriage from the Crown rumbled up the drive, its polished wheels striking the stone with a rhythmic insistence that echoed like a drumbeat of judgment. Eleanor stood at the threshold of the library, hands clasped, heart taut with anticipation. The Duke appeared beside her, impeccably composed in appearance, though she perceived the subtle tremor of tension in his posture. Today would determine whether their union, fragile yet genuine, could withstand the scrutiny of the world beyond their halls. The weight of it pressed upon them both, a pressure neither had fully anticipated but each had quietly borne. The envoys were precise, their arrival marked by clipped bows and eyes sharp with appraisal. They carried no malice, only the authority of a system intent upon validation. Eleanor noted the Duke's quiet hand resting at the small of her back as they passed, a gesture both protective and intimate, signaling that their connection, though unspoken, was recognized and claimed. She felt the warmth of that touch seep into her chest, grounding her in the certainty that she was not merely a figure of convenience, but a partner in truth and consequence. Their steps echoed through the hall as they entered the formal sitting room, where every detail of arrangement, chairs, curtains, and gilded frames, seemed to demand demonstration of their union's authenticity. The envoy's scrutiny began with ceremony, questions measured and formal, assessing propriety and composure. Each inquiry required subtle proof, that they shared decisions, that they coordinated, that their interactions conveyed mutual respect and understanding. Eleanor responded with calm dignity, her voice steady and measured, reflecting not only her education but the quiet confidence earned through weeks of navigating the Duke's world. Adrian, likewise, answered with precision, though Eleanor noticed the faint relaxation in his shoulders, a softening that spoke of trust in her presence. Each response, each small gesture, revealed the unspoken truth of their bond, a truth that required neither proclamation nor embellishment to be evident to discerning eyes. After formalities, the envoys requested a tour of the estate, observing the natural rhythm of their lives within the manor. Eleanor walked beside Adrian through the corridors she had come to know intimately, noting how his hand occasionally brushed hers in passing, light, almost accidental, yet intentional enough to communicate warmth and connection. They moved through the study, the library, and the drawing room, their coordination subtle, seamless, a dance refined by shared experience and mutual respect. Observers might have thought it mere propriety, yet Eleanor knew the deeper significance. Each glance, each word, each considered action affirmed not only their commitment to duty, but the quiet truth of affection taking root within the walls of Harrowden Hall. By midday, Eleanor found herself beside the Duke in the gardens, where winter's frost had begun to yield to spring's tentative warmth. The sun broke through a scattering of clouds, illuminating the trimmed hedges and flower-beds with golden light. Adrian turned to her, expression softened by the clarity of the moment. "You have handled yourself with more grace than I dared hope," he said, voice low but sincere. I am grateful not only for your discretion but for the steadiness you have brought into this house. Eleanor's heart swelled at his words, the sincerity in his tone piercing the years of restraint and solitude that had marked his life. She inclined her head, acknowledging his praise without betraying the tremor of emotion it had stirred within her. As they walked among the budding flowers, a brief silence fell between them, yet it was not empty. Each sensed the profound shift that had occurred over weeks of quiet proximity and shared trials. The Duke, once reserved to the point of isolation, had begun to allow her presence to soften the edges of his vigilance. Eleanor, once wary and constrained by scandal, had discovered a place where her voice, judgment, and spirit were valued. Together, they had navigated scrutiny, duty, and rumor, emerging with a bond stronger than the fragile paper that had once defined their marriage. The envoys observed their interactions, noting subtle affirmations of partnership without ever intruding. When the final questions were asked, Eleanor and Adrian responded with a measured ease that belied the intensity of the scrutiny they had endured. Each word, each glance, each carefully chosen gesture conveyed not only propriety but genuine understanding, a quiet declaration that neither title nor circumstance could fully articulate. The envoys, perceiving this unspoken truth, exchanged brief nods and murmurs of approval, their task concluded. The couple had passed the test, not through elaborate demonstration but through the authenticity of their shared presence. Returning to the manor, the Duke and Eleanor paused at the threshold of the drawing room. The firelight flickered, casting warm shadows across the walls and furniture, illuminating the subtleties of expression and posture that words could not capture. Adrian turned to her fully, the weight of weeks and months distilled into the sharp clarity of this moment. "Eleanor," he said, voice deliberate yet gentle, "these weeks have shown me that what began as necessity has become something I would not relinquish for any obligation. I am no longer content with pretense. I wish for truth, in all its forms, with you." Eleanor's chest constricted, and for a moment she feared the depth of feeling rising within her. She responded with quiet courage, her own voice firm yet tinged with the tremor of emotion, "And I, Adrian, have come to understand that our bond is more than circumstance. I see now that what I once feared, being only a symbol, is replaced by the reality of being seen, respected, and valued." Her words, deliberate and unflinching, carried the weight of vulnerability embraced rather than avoided. He stepped closer, their proximity bridging the space between decorum and intimacy. The warmth of the fire mingled with the heat of their shared understanding, and in that instant, the house that had once seemed cold and unyielding felt imbued with possibility. Adrian reached for her hand, a measured gesture that spoke volumes of commitment, trust, and the quiet courage required to embrace affection without the interference of societal expectation. Eleanor's fingers closed around his, a tactile confirmation of the truths they had both spoken, yet neither dared to name aloud in full. Even as the room settled into this fragile harmony, the echo of responsibility remained. They had passed the crowned scrutiny, affirmed their partnership, and discovered the beginnings of love and respect in one another. Yet Eleanor sensed, in the subtle crease of Adrian's brow and the careful vigilance of his eyes, that the world beyond Harrowden Hall still held challenges, expectations, and judgments that would require continued navigation. The warmth of the present, though profound, could not erase entirely the pressures of the future. The day drew to a close with a rare moment of quiet reflection. Together, they walked along the terrace, the evening air crisp but softened by the glow of twilight. Eleanor felt the culmination of weeks of shared trials, small gestures, and whispered confidences crystallize into a tangible sense of possibility. She realized that their union, though initiated by necessity, had transformed into a bond anchored in mutual respect, understanding, and the tentative stirrings of love. Adrian, in turn, allowed the shadowed corners of his soul to brighten, acknowledging the subtle joy and steady companionship Eleanor had brought into his life. As night fell, they returned to the manor, the fire in the hearth burning low yet steady, casting a soft illumination across familiar spaces now imbued with renewed significance. They stood together in the quiet of the library, hand in hand, both aware that the trials of scrutiny had ended, yet that the work of building a life together had only just begun. Outside, the world continued, indifferent and demanding, but within the walls of Harrowden Hall, a sanctuary of trust and care had been forged. And then, as the first hush of midnight settled upon the house, a soft knock interrupted the stillness. A letter, delivered with the discretion reserved for matters of great consequence, was placed upon the desk. Eleanor's heart stilled as she recognized the seal, distinct and commanding. Adrian's hand lingered briefly upon hers before he reached for the envelope, his eyes dark with apprehension and curiosity. Together, they opened it, revealing words written with urgency, hinting at new challenges and unexpected opportunities that neither could have anticipated. Their hands remained intertwined, a silent acknowledgement that whatever awaited beyond this moment, they would face it together, bound not by duty alone, but by a shared courage and the quiet promise of hearts no longer restrained.